It's always tough to follow lunch. I hope you all didn't eat too much mac and cheese and you're getting sleepy. But this room is very full, so I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement around this topic. So I'll just do a quick introduction of myself in case you all aren't aware of who I am. And you don't have to worry about this slide for a few minutes, just so you know, don't have to read while I'm talking. Thank you. So my name is Amber Sciligo. I'm the Director of Science Programs at the Organic Center. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's based in DC with a mission to conduct, convene, and communicate science around organic. So we do a lot of work that helps. I see us having two streams of work, one where we're helping to facilitate research that helps farmers be more successful in organic, and then also we're helping to build the demand for farmers' products by communicating with consumers. And one of the major activities that we do is aimed at building communities. And one way that we help build communities is to host our signature conference event called Organic Confluences. And this last year, we held it in conjunction with the Organic Trade Association in DC. And the topic was reducing plastic along the entire organic supply chain. And I have never seen, for one of our conferences, so much energy around a topic. I mean, partly it was our first in-person meeting since COVID, but also everybody was so excited to talk about this. So we decided at Oak, I'm also a board member at Oak and been on the conference planning committee, so I get to sort of have a little more influence, I guess, in what we talk about, but we decided it might be a good idea to talk about plastic here with you all. And we were really fortunate to have a couple of the speakers that we had at Confluences here with you today. So Alejandra Warren, who is a co-founder of Plastic Free Future, will be joining us. She'll be joining us remotely from Zoom. I think she's based in San Diego. She can correct me if I'm wrong, where she is right now, but I know she's on Pacific time at least. And then we'll have Dr. David Gonthier from the University of Kentucky, who also spoke at this conference. And then two familiar faces from your farming community here. We'll have Ben Abell from Rootbound Farm and John Bell from Elmwood. So my job at the beginning is just to sort of set the stage and share why we should be having this conversation here in Kentucky. And there are actually several reasons. And the first reason is we should be talking about this because it's the right thing to do. This falls right in line with the spirit of organic. One of the major foundational principles is to avoid using synthetic inputs and petrochemicals. And plastic is also a petrochemical, and we, in the organic industry, really rely on plastic as tools, and so it becomes sort of this Achilles heel of the organic industry. And Alejandra is going to share with us some of the implications of plastic production as well as disposal, and remind us that we should not just be considering environmental health and human health, but also be considering some social justice and equity components of this issue. The other reason that we want to talk about this is because the rest of the world is talking about this. There's been a lot of attention on plastic use, on plastic reduction, and some of the policies that are rolling out overseas are trickling down to the US, either in the sense that the US is going to be implementing similar policies, or at least we will be impacted by those policies just because of global trade. So Dave will be sharing with us some information from the FAO risk assessment of plastic pollution. And I'll mention that there's been a lot of work done in this space focused on packaging, plastic packaging. And there needs to be more work that's done in looking at plastic in the field, how we use it for farm production. And there is a desire to reduce plastic in the production side of things across as a piece of the entire supply chain. The NOSB recently, I guess in the fall, they just had another meeting, and every 5 years something comes up for sunset review, and plastic mulch was one of those things that was discussed. And there was a vote on whether or not to allow plastic mulch to remain on the list of allowable substances. It did not pass in this, it passed in the sense that it does remain. It will remain for now, but there was a lot of discussion at this meeting about how there needs to be more reduction of plastic in organic. So just to say that this is being talked about, it's coming, and we really want to be a part of that conversation. Because this won't be the first or the last time that some of these plastic tools are going to come under threat. And that's really important for us in the organic industry because plastic is used frequently as an effective tool, as the function of several different effective tools, which we will talk about today. So if it turns out that we have to replace some of these tools, it will be a challenge, and we want to be ahead of the game in that. And that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that we're not prepared and we have to make replacements and changes, and it will be an impediment to certification for organic. So we will have some conversation from Ben and John, who will share with us, how they're using plastic in their operations and some of the complex relationships they have with that plastic use. So finally, we'll end this session with a short panel discussion. I'll have some questions. We'll see how far we can get with them before we open it up for the audience Q&A. And I just wanted to highlight that the intention of this conversation that we're having today, the intention behind this session is not to have anybody walk away feeling guilty about using plastic. We're not here to demonize you. We don't want to create anxiety about, how you have to go to 100% plastic free in your farms or your operations. But what we're hoping is that everybody here will learn something today that will motivate you to constantly consider both the pros and the cons of using plastic tools and to start thinking critically about the use of those plastic tools. So, when you have the chance, question, is there a different way? Can we develop different ways that will work for you? And what are the changes that will be the easiest for you to make and have a large impact? I think that these considerations will help you identify the support that you will need in this journey of reducing plastic in the field. And the goal is for you all to be able to preemptively create your own path, design the path forward that works for you so that you take some charge in that rulemaking instead of being the one that's on the sidelines having the rules made for you, which may or may not work against you. And then just remember, we are the leaders in the change in sustainable farming. And this is one way we have an opportunity to continue being the leaders in that change. So with that, I would like to, I forgot we had the slide that I told you not to pay attention to and we took it away. You don't have to pay attention to it now either because we're done. But basically, this is just an outline of the presentation, our day. So we can go ahead and move past that and bring Alejandra on. There she is. Great. Welcome, Alejandra.
Good morning. Can you see me and hear me?
We can do both.
Perfect. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, you're good to go.
Wonderful. Good morning. My name is Alejandra Warren. Thank you so much for inviting me again to have this conversation. I am the Executive Director of Plastic Free Future. We are located in Ohlone Land, that is the San Francisco Bay Area. And we focus on outreach to systemically excluded communities, low-income communities, and communities of color. And we also do a lot of work around policy, around plastics, local policy, and as you will hear soon, global policy too. So we started a plastic-free future a few years ago because we were concerned about the effects of plastic. There was a lot of conversation around plastic and the turtle. I don't know if you remember the video of the turtle with the straw, and people were worrying about that. But we were also concerned about other effects of plastics, the effects of plastics in climate, human health, and also the environmental justice consequences of the production of plastics. So we wanted to take an intersectional approach to the problem of plastics, and that's why we started this nonprofit. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the problem with the what we call the life cycle of plastics. Sometimes we think that plastics begin when we use that container with food, but the fact is that plastics begin way before that. So, like Amber was mentioning before, plastics, sometimes we forget that they come from fossil fuels. 99% of plastics are coming from fossil fuels, and that includes all of the plastics we have in our life. So, when we think about the petrochemical industry and the impact they're having on climate, and we relate it to plastic, we have a different perspective about the effects of plastics in our life. So it starts with extraction and transportation, right? If plastics are fossil fuels, it begins with the extraction. This picture is actually from one of my friends and colleagues. Her organization is called Fence Line Watch. This is her community, and this is where her community lives. This is not an isolated area. This is an area where Black and Brown communities live when they're surrounded by schools. It's a neighborhood. And this is what they have to deal with on a daily basis. Sometimes when people move right away to that community, they get eye irritation within 1 hour. And then it starts with fatigue, dizziness, and it builds up not only through days and weeks, but through generations. So we're talking about intergenerational harm that this plastic production is producing to the point of many families having several members suffering from cancer. Then we have refining and manufacturing. Again, not only communities, but workers are exposed to these really toxic chemicals that are being associated with cancer, with endocrine disruption, and with many other sicknesses that we're starting to connect through science now. Now, the part that we're more familiar with, consumer use, plastics are not only the bag that we see, they're also really small particles that we call microplastics or nanoplastics. And those are the ones that we're starting to see that they are leaching into our food. The chemicals of plastics and also the microplastics are being ingested by people that don't have any idea that their food is in contact with these materials. This study just came out last week talking about how this company tested about 100 products in the supermarket, and over 90% of them had microplastics, nanoplastics, or plastic chemicals. This is a crazy number because we knew that plastics were entering our body and our food, but we didn't know that the number was so high. And we're talking about products, we're talking about yogurt, oils, we're talking about everything you can buy in a supermarket. Almost anything has plastic chemicals that are already connected to serious human health consequences. Now, the next part after the consumer use, we have the disposal and the management of plastics. So that's the part that we're more familiar with. Around the 70s, we started to hear this campaign of recycling, passing the fault to the consumer and saying, well, if that bottle ends up in the ocean, it's because you're not recycling that bottle. But now in 2024, we have enough data to understand that plastics are completely out of control. Even in the United States, we have a number of 5% recycling of plastics in this country. 5%. No matter how good you are at rinsing your bottle and putting it in the right bin, only 5% of those plastics are actually becoming plastic again. 5%, which means that 95% of the plastics we're consuming, we have a problem with those. Most of them end up in other countries that don't have the capacity to deal with them. And some of them, a lot of them, are being burned in communities of color within the United States too. So we have the problem of burning plastics in the United States. Again, low-income communities and communities of color are exposed to these incinerators, where you can see all of the chemicals that are being released into the environment, released into the air, and then we are inhaling, and then we are getting sick with all of those nasty, horrible chemicals that are in the air, most of them located in these low-income communities. And now when we talk about recycling and we get so excited about recycling our stuff, we found that a really huge percentage of the plastics that we quote unquote recycle in the United States end up going to different countries. Sadly, that is creating a really toxic environment for communities that are dealing with these plastics, including children working in these terrible, terrible conditions. And as it relates to farming, we found numbers that about 90% of the plastics that we use for watering systems in farming are going to Ecuador, and they don't have any way to recycle these PVC tubes that are being imported as recycled plastic. Now, even remember that if you are not using those tubes for irrigation anymore and you are recycle them because you're trying to do the right thing and joining a program on recycling, these plastics are not washed or clean. So that means we're also exporting microbe in soil that is going to have a different impact in these communities. And again, like Amber said, I'm not saying this to depress you and make you sad. It's just that we all need to be highly educated, understand the consequences, and understand the science so we can make better decisions. Because the entire life cycle of plastics is disproportionately affected low income and communities of color. A really high percentage, most of them, these manufacturing plants and petrochemical plants are located in these neighborhoods. So we're talking about environmental problem, a social problem, but also a problem of racism because most of them are communities of color. And then we have the environmental exposure, which means all of these plastics and microplastics floating in the air are entering our bodies through inhalation and ingestion. And that sadly includes plants. For plants, we are starting to understand data around how there are different ways in which plants are absorbing these microplastics and nanoplastics. Some plants are filtrating them and keeping them in the roots. Other plants are moving them across the entire plant. Other plants are absorbing these microplastics and nanoplastics through the leaves, which means if we increase our efforts to remove plastic, we are reducing the amount of plastics and microplastics that are entering our crops and therefore our bodies. So like Amber was talking before, there is local policy, federal policy, and international policy working in this issue because we have enough science to understand that this is a really, really serious problem. We are part of our organization is working in the Global Plastics Treaty to put together a treaty with 170 countries to decide how is global policy going to look like as it relates to plastics. And what we do in this conference that we were in Paris, in Africa, talking about the importance of finding solutions to the problem, but not switching to another problem, but kind of going back to our ancestral knowledge, to our the knowledge where we already had. Organic farmers are known for being innovative and creative, and you are the ones that I'm sure are going to come up with the solutions that the farming community is going to apply in decades. So I love this quote that says the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And when you think about this, if you go to bed thinking about there's absolutely nothing I can do because this problem is too big, please remind yourself that that's not true. Every single action, small or big, is going to have an impact because we're going to be part of the systemic change that we need to get rid of this amount of plastic. So these are pictures of how my childhood looked like. I grew up in South America, in Colombia. I grew up going to my neighbors to see these beautiful produce without any packaging, zero packaging at all. My grandma and I would bring our little basket and we would go shopping. We would come home without any plastic. Also, my grandma, my aunts, my mom, all of us have a lot of knowledge around herbs and plants and how to heal with them. So if you had a headache, you knew what plant you would use. If you had a stomach ache, you knew what plant you would use. We would grow these plants, take care of these plants, create a relationship of love and understanding with these plants, and heal ourselves. Also, when I was little, Coca-Cola didn't have plastic. They have bottles that you would return to the store. It was always a glass bottle, and you bring your bottle and get the deposit back or switch the bottle. There was always a system of refill. And it wasn't until the late 90s that we started to see a lot of more plastic coming to South America. But then when we think about those solutions from the past, that for United States probably was the 50s or the 60s, but in South America it was more recent than that. I got to see it with my own eyes. Look at the problems that we're solving. We are talking about healthier, cleaner, more beautiful food, and that's the goal of organic farming. Have these opportunities to provide communities with nutrition, with beautiful, healthy meals that they can prepare themselves instead of depending on this terrible picture on the right. That there's so much wrong about that. But now that you think about it, it's not only the nutritional aspect of it, but we're also talking about plastics. And this picture, I love this picture because it makes us think about the impact of a basket. This picture is from a program from a few years ago in Colombia, in my country, where they try to push people to reclaim the basket. And these baskets are replacing thousands, if not millions, of plastic bags. So, embracing our culture and embracing our ancestral knowledge is going to be really important to solve this crisis. Also, if you think about it, those fibers are organic, and we have to create options for our communities that support our businesses as farmers, but also create an alternative and a solution for this problem. And I love this one because when you think about going to herbs and to medicine that our planet or earth or beautiful earth give us, we are rescuing that knowledge that is going to keep us away from the toxicity of the pharma industry that is not only toxic for our bodies, but again, look at the amount of plastic they're producing. And none of them are recyclable, sadly, or reusable. So switching back to these mechanisms that connect us to the earth, connect us to the soil again, are the solutions that we're going to need to come up with. This is a picture of a family of farmers that we helped in Northern California. They had, as you can see in a corner of the left side, there's some Ziploc bags there with beans. That's all they had before. Every single pound of beans packed in Ziploc bags. And we work with them to help them find these materials, to encourage people to bring their own bags to the market, to not only reduce the amount of bags they were given, but also to have this conversation around why it's so important to move away from plastics. And people love the change. They think the baskets are so cute. We actually found old baskets in Goodwill, so we didn't even have to buy anything new for them. This is another picture of farmers we're working with, encouraging people to bring their own bags. And we are really proud to say that we've saved tens of thousands of bags from entering our communities only through education and giving these bags for free. Actually, those bags are made of fabric that we rescue from the community. They're all cotton because we know that fabrics that are made with polyester and plastics are also a problem. So we want to make sure that they're cotton only. Rescue that fabric from the community, and our community members are helping us make those bags, and then we give them for free and people bring them again and again. We have people that had the same bag for over 3 years, and they're so proud that that same bag has been part of their process of going to the farmers market every single week. And we work with other initiatives. In this one, we are rescuing the strawberry baskets because we have conversations with farmers and they tell us, look, the paper ones are not working for my strawberries. They're not working for my blackberries. So what can I do? So we encourage people to bring the baskets back. They're washing them really well and putting them again to use. So we are making sure that we reuse these materials while we find a better alternative to replace the plastic. We're also encouraging people to bring their own jars to pack their fruits. They stay fresh, they go straight into the refrigerator, they last way longer than in the plastic baskets. And people, once they start trying the solution, they make it part of their routine. And they see that the food is always fresh when they keep them in their jars or in their cotton bags. So we've been hearing a lot of positive feedback from people too, and from the farmers. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the solutions, even though they're small, they really accumulate. In this picture with the baskets, we saved close to 1,000 baskets from going to the landfill because these baskets are not really recyclable. So those small things that we're doing are the ones that are going to be the real solution. So I encourage all of you to embrace that creativity and that innovation that organic farmers have been known for generations, and take this as an opportunity to be the leaders and the pioneers of alternatives that have less plastic. And again, like Amber said, this is not to send you home sad, it's to send you home with a lot of hope, with a lot of ideas, and with a lot of um, possibilities to show us that a life with less plastic is possible. And this is an image that we love to share with everyone every time we give a presentation. It says, may your environmental activism always be intersectional. And that is an image that I love because it centers our Mother Earth. It centers the generosity that she has and that she gives us. And when we think about the environment as all of us do, we can be more mindful and more compassionate about the solutions that we have. So every time you remove a little bit of plastic, even if it's just one plastic bag, think about the impact that that bag is not having in those communities that are suffering from the injustices created by plastic. And here's my our QR code if you want to connect in Instagram. And if you want to connect more or learn more about the science behind farming and plastics, please reach out and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
This is on. Thank you so much, Alejandra. We're going to move on next to David Gonthier, who will. Yep, here we go. Yeah, I'll just let you take it.
Hey, everybody. I think I have the wrong slides up here. There we go. So I'm David Gonthier. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Entomology. And I work actually quite a bit with plastics and organics and some of the benefits and new innovations that people are doing to make them more useful. And so some of the research we're beginning to do is also centered on this trade-off of how we decide what is essential and necessary, and where are we going to have challenges as new pressures come in to replace plastics and things like that. And so whether you are someone who's on board with a lot of the changes that are occurring or not, the consumers, I believe, especially organic consumers and especially young people, are very concerned about plastic use across the supply chain. As Alejandra mentioned, with a lot of the environmental justice, a lot of it is driven by some of the issues. Wow, this is weird. I'm not going to do that. So a lot of the consumers are really originally focused on the issues that we're seeing in oceans and how all of the plastics are ending up there. And one consumer report noted that 87% of Gen Z and millennials are very concerned about the ocean pollution. I think we're all tired of not having any options. Pretty much everything that we buy has to be wrapped in plastic these days. I'm wearing a uniform almost entirely made out of plastic, at least 95% probably polyester of some sort. And some people don't have the choice because now plastic is always the cheapest option out there. And so across the board, this is the global use of plastics from some fact report from plastic industry. But it highlights some of the major sectors where plastics are being used, like building and construction, electronics, automotives. Probably the biggest player, of course, is packaging, where they estimate about 40% of plastics are used. And there's some growing concern, even though our agriculture only makes up about 3.4% of this plastic, Some of the issues that it can cause, of course, because some of the plastics are never going to be recyclable, they're dirtied by the production systems, but also they come in contact with the environment more readily because they're out there in the environment. And so really recently, I'm just going to put this up there, there was this FAO report that Amber mentioned to start. It came out in 2021. That's starting to assess what are we going to do and where are plastics being used in agriculture. And there is a QRL code. This is a long document, but I would say a very good one. It's very readable. Maybe just choose the sections you're going to look at a little bit carefully because it's like 160 pages. But very good, and I'm going to talk a bit about some of the things and integrate some other information. But as it points out in this report, there is a lot of plastics used. Again, food packaging outweighs the production packaging that there is. And then there's also a lot of missing data that this report brings out. They didn't even really talk about how food is stored, processed, and distributed in plastics, and how plastics are used to make those things fit into a wholesale supply chain of things being shipped across the country, etc. But it does dive into a lot of the different ways plastics are being used on farm and starting to get at what are the benefits, why are people using them, and also some of the difficulties of replacing some of these. So here's a graphic actually from a different paper, but many people in here are probably familiar with, oh my gosh. On farm, there are different places where plastics are covered well. So in field, crop fields, we have irrigation, single-use, longer-term plastics, and irrigation lines that go to different places. Plastic mulch is a big area that there's a lot of use. And then actually greenhouse plastics and row covers and shade cloth and things like that are, together all of these films are the biggest amount of plastics being used in agriculture across the globe. There are some places where plastics are used more heavily, like in Asia. Apparently they use a lot more films than we do. And another big area of concern is the polymer-coated fertilizers and pesticides that are used. I believe they're excluded from organics, but these are plastic pellets that release fertilizer slowly, but they're actually never going to be removed from the field, so they, in a sense, can contaminate the fields. And then biosolids and other atmospheric ways can actually introduce a lot of microplastics into farm fields, and there's a lot of research beginning to kind of assess that. And so why people are using plastics is because they have become actually super beneficial. I study a lot of ecosystem services in my past research, and we often are always looking for species or crops or practices that are multifunctional, providing a lot of different benefits, and it's hard to argue that plastic mulch might not be the most multifunctional thing on a farm, in that it controls weeds, it reduces your reliance on herbicides if you weren't organic, it retains moisture and really captures the water that you're applying. It can be used in conjunction with drip tape, obviously. It increases soil temperatures and can help basically crops get to harvest sooner, and in the end it can really increase yields and ultimately quality of a lot of the production that's there. And so these have become, this tool or this method, whether it's plastic or not, has become pretty essential in production. I don't have numbers for Kentucky, but there's a survey suggesting about 60% of fruit and vegetable farmers in Tennessee use plastic mulch. I assume those numbers are probably very similar in Kentucky. We've been working with a team of research across Cornell, Kentucky, and Iowa, where we were surveying organic growers in a big place that plastic use is becoming vital is in high tunnels and row covers, where 70 to 88% of organic growers from the Northeast, Midwest, and South said that they utilize these tools. And of course, there are tons of benefits and actually very important uses of these not just for organic, but for local production, for being able to extend seasons and things like that. And so this is actually where our team has been doing a lot of research on row covers and their utility in that they can be used for controlling pests and diseases, also some weather events. And so growers have agreed across this survey that they reduce insecticide use, vulnerability of weather to weather, and increase quality and yield. And these are places where they also can contribute to extension of the season. And then, of course, we have high tunnels, which have been a very key player in being able to grow things for 4 seasons in places like Kentucky or further north. They're critical in terms of being able to actually have a large enough market and help producers make that system work for them, or be able to contribute to food production. And so in reality, what we have is, turning back to this FAO report, we have a lot of plastics that are important to our production. And there are some alternatives, but the question really becomes, which ones are we going to focus on prioritizing, reducing the use, or eliminating the use, or trying to extend the use? And the report goes through a risk assessment of the different types of plastics on the farms and really tries to assess which ones would be best to target. And so the plastics that they ranked all of the commonly used things in several production systems, and the ones used most in the highest quantities, the ones that have the highest potential for contamination, the ones that are coming in direct contact with the agroecosystem or the environment and have the potential to harm plants or animals or humans. Basically, they took all of these factors and tried to figure out which ones are the best candidates to replace. And so here's a summary with some of the fisheries and forestry plastics removed. But at the top, you can see are those polymer-coated slow-release fertilizers that, because again, you're putting the plastics in the field with no intention of removing them, those ranked highest. But plastic mulches were right up there with them, partially because they're a single use. They can't be removed from the field, or they can't be, because when they're removed from the field, they're dirty and can't be recycled very easily. But they also come in direct contact with the soils. Those are ranked highly. And similarly with the single-use drip tape, those are an area of concern. But you can see down at the bottom that greenhouse films and semi-permanent irrigation tubes actually ranked pretty well in this risk assessment. And the idea here is that they actually last maybe 4 years or more, and they additionally don't necessarily come in contact with that environment unless they get exploded in a storm and those particles go everywhere, which we all know happens. But that's a lower risk, and so some of these things are considered lower risk and possibly ones that might have a different strategy. So there's been also some discussion about, what do we do next with these different kinds? And so for some of these things like single-use drip tape or single-use plastic mulch, they're non-recyclable. And so to make basically advances in this, people are proposing redesigning or finding alternatives, reducing the use as strategies that going forward are going to be advantageous. But to do that, there needs to be biodegradable alternatives available. And so until that time, there is not very clear options. And so I will touch a bit on that in just 1 second. But on the other hand, for other types of plastics that are recyclable and durable and can last longer, this strategy actually may be a place where we want to try to prolong the use if you're going to use them, figure out ways of reusing them, and then eventually recycle them once they're done because they're clean and they can be recycled. But there are challenges here still too, and advances that are needed because one of the big issues with the microplastics is if you're going to prolong the use of something for a long time, it's going to degrade. So we need to make sure those products don't contain harmful additives that are the things people are concerned that can be toxic to soils or plants or even humans in some cases, and avoid this chemical weathering as you keep things out in the field. And then, as Alejandra mentioned, we actually need recycling programs that actually recycle things for these things to work, or else we're basically just throwing them away again or shipping them off for somebody else to deal with. Okay, so the last point I wanted to make is that thinking about single-use plastic as a strategy for these non-recyclable single-use plastics, this is an area where for at least 10 years people have been already thinking about what we're going to do next because the writing has been on the wall for some time. And so in organics, single-use plastic mulch, there are clearly alternatives that some people have ability to do. So non-synthetic, untreated materials, using chips and leaves and straw and other mulching materials is a perfectly fine, valuable strategy. May not work, of course, as well as plastic mulch. There are some paper mulch products that are now commercially available and OMRI certified, but they do take some advancing of how you're going to integrate them into your system. They will not work as well, and they need a lot of adjustments, and I'm sure a lot of farmers can speak to this in terms of their experience with those products. And then actually in organics there is allowable biodegradable bio-based mulch films that are now they're certified as an option. However, the National Organic Program rule recently, actually they've been reviewing this since 2012, I believe. And in 2014, they made it an allowable item if it met these particular rules. And as of now, there still is no commercially available product that meets these standards. And there is one big difference here with these biodegradable mulches that is important to note, and that is they're supposed to be a labor saver in that you're supposed to leave them in the field and not pull them out like you do have to do with plastic mulch. So they are supposed to be able to biodegrade in the field. And the challenge why there is no commercially available products is because they have to be made from excluded methods. So the feedstocks or the microorganisms or plants used to make them have to also meet all of the requirements of organic standards, like can't be GM products and things like that. They have to be compostable. That rule is almost unnecessary because the idea is they also have to biodegrade in the field. And that's, composting is of course under high temperatures, but biodegradation would occur at ambient temperatures in the field. So because the goal is to leave them in the field, they need to be able to biodegrade under those conditions. So the rule is 90% has to biodegrade in less than 2 years. And so that is something that has been a challenge for the industry to create. And then the last one is that they more recently changed the rule to be 80% bio-based, meaning that the products can't have other synthetic products in them like plastics and things like that that you don't want to just leave in your field. And so industry hasn't been able to create something, but this is actually apparently it seems like a game. The NOP is trying to push industry to create the product that they want instead of changing their rules to meet what industry says they can make. And so this is a big challenge going forward. So the last thing I think overall I want to talk a bit about or end on is thinking about you all and how you can make the biggest impact. And you know, one big point is that even if we were to replace all the plastics in agriculture, they're arguing that would only put a 3.4 dent in all of the plastic use out there if we replaced agricultural plastics. And so in one case, you know, thinking about your packaging and how you can replace those with non-plastic things is an easy first step. It's also a very marketable step as your consumers see those things. And so that is one direction to go. And kind of driving with what some of the things Alejandra said, I think that when we think about local food systems and direct-to-consumer marketing, those are actually places where we're already reducing a lot of plastic. I'm very interested in exploring how much that is compared to other supply chains, and if that outweighs some of the plastic needed in fields going forward. So we do have a new project that's focusing on row covers, but we'll also be simultaneously really trying to dive into some of these questions around plastic use. There is a website coming soon, and please email me if you have interest in learning more or interest in the project, and I'll connect you later. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. I think it's really helpful to get a sense of, identify the areas where we are using plastic, how important of a tool is it, how effective of a tool is it, so that as we think about replacing it, whether as a substitute or a cultural practice, what level of effectiveness do we need to achieve? So I appreciate that conversation. Next, we'll hear from John Bell, who will share a little bit more about what it looks like to use plastic in his operation. And I just wanted to note that we probably won't have a lot of time, sorry, not yet. We probably won't have a lot of time to do a panel discussion if you all have a lot of questions in Slido, but this is also a reminder. Put your questions in Slido if you want us to address them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm John Bell from Georgetown, 30 minutes east of here, just to give you an idea. Elmwood Stock Farm. When Jenny asked me if I wanted to serve on a panel to talk about plastics and organic agriculture, it made me kind of uncomfortable. So therefore I knew I should do it. So here's our story. Elmwood Stock Farm, a quick introduction, 380 acres, been certified organic for over 20-something years. Fortunately, I have the good fortune of growing up on the farm that I'm farming today, farm it with my sister, my brother-in-law. My parents are now retired. We've got about 6 full-time co-workers, team members that we'd be lost without. Then we've got another 10 to 15 seasonal or part-time team members that literally, obviously, we couldn't do without. We currently grow about 40 acres of vegetables. There's a little bit of other crops, grains and forages and pastures to go along with it. But the 40 acres of vegetables, 5 species of livestock, it's almost all of it is sold within 70 miles of the farm through farmers markets, CSA, but direct to consumer. Very little wholesale, and the majority of what doesn't hit that category would be like some proteins that we ship around the country. So our approach, or the way we try to farm, or the philosophy at Elmwood, it was taught by my grandfather and my father. We've always been a biological type farming operation, integrating livestock and crops together in a symbiosis or a living organism of the farm. One supports the other, and our job, taught by my grandfather, is just to steward that relationship or encourage it and get out of the way, let Mother Nature do her work. And so that's the background that my sister and I were raised under, so it made it pretty easy to become an organic farm, because that's kind of the principle or philosophy behind organic farming. So that approach of having a fairly closed loop, sort of sustainable type farm is our goal, and we employ biology primarily and diversity and rotations to see that happens. Add value and remove waste. So we're a retail farm because we wanted to grow food for our neighbors, but also, the fewer pounds that leave your front gate, the fewer pounds of energy or nutrients you have to create to replace it. And so by selling a meal or a food ingredient rather than a commodity, it makes it easier. If we want to be kind of a closed loop farm, it makes it easier. We have less to regenerate or replace. So that approach or philosophy on how we farm results in, we're a very low user of off-farm inputs in general, especially protectants or pesticides and fertility inputs. Our livestock crop dance or rotation around the farm, the majority of our nutrients and energy is captured when it's in the forage side and the cattle grazing or the sheep grazing part of the rotation helps us capture energy, build fertility, store up latent energy in the soil that we turn around and cash in by growing the cash crops that we leave the front gate. So low fertility inputs, low pesticide inputs. We do use a fair bit of fuel. We have equipment, tractors, vehicles, and then we also do employ moderate plastics, a moderate amount of plastics. So that's why I'm here. So why are plastics used? Reasons for plastic use. So this is my thinking about it. Why do we use plastics on the farm, on our organic farm? So first, demand for local out-of-season food. We sell directly to our customers. We're not doing a commodity or a bulk thing seasonally. So to have arugula in January, or quite frankly in July, we have to have, a high tunnel or low tunnel, some type of weather protection to have arugula in January. And our customers like to buy arugula in January. To have arugula in July without chemicals all over it, we have to have some type of protective netting or a barrier. In order to meet the standards of organic production, reduced pesticide use, one of our main tools to do that, besides rotation, besides releasing beneficials, besides habitat, is exclusion. Used to be row covers and now it's netting. And then efficiency. So water conservation, organic or not, plastics play a huge role in water conservation. And then also the way our rotation and diverse farm and all the things that make our farm weirder than our neighbors remind people or harken back to the way my grandfather used to farm, when there was multiple crops and multiple livestock. And what's the difference in the way are we farming the old way? Are we really behind? Are we farming like my grandfather did? The big difference is, frankly, a lot of stuff that plastics bring. We can run a lot more cattle, or we can use the cattle to build soil faster by using electric fence or electric netting, portable waters, portable water tanks, drip irrigation. So the difference, frankly, as I think about it, in the past when I've always answered the question about the difference between our farm now and when my grandfather ran it, it's the efficiency, it's the production, it's the diversity that we're able to sell a complete meal to people rather than 4 or 5 vegetables and a couple of species. A lot of that's allowed because of our use of plastics. So are plastics a necessary evil? This is the way I think about it on our farm. In our production system or in our organic system, there are tools we utilize that I don't love, like the fuel use. But I still use tractors. But in my mind, I think someday that tractor could be replaced by a renewable energy pulling device, or it could be replaced by a mule or a horse. So I'm using tractors, but at least I'm justifying it theoretically. This is replaceable by something else that might not use a carbon-based fuel. I drug my feet for a bazillion years on adopting a flamer because I could never justify, if I utilize that crutch and get addicted to it, I'm just burning petroleum and there's no alternative to it. And so we recently bought a little 4-foot flamer, but after 25 years of not doing it, for that very philosophical reason. I'll bring that up. That's the way I look at a lot of the plastic use. So the first way I think about it is, what's a crutch? I use it out of convenience just because it makes life easier for me, kind of a guilty pleasure, the things that I'm, should be ashamed of doing. Then the important but possible alternatives. That's another way. So like it's back to I use a tractor, but I feel like theoretically I could use something else down the road. And then there's a few products that are plastic that I think is going to be really tough to replace. A crutch for convenience. So, and some of these products will be on here in multiple different categories. But the polywire, We're able to rotate cattle on a daily basis quickly and easily because of polywire. And in that other picture, clearly high tunnels and greenhouses. Every one of those could theoretically be replaced with a glass greenhouse. So, I mean, it's purely, these are way more affordable. That's why I do it. I can cover one in an afternoon. I can build one in a couple of days. A glass greenhouse is not that quick or inexpensive. But if we're being honest, I should have glass greenhouses up instead of poly tunnels. Sisal twine versus plastic twine. 90% of the twine we use on the farm is the sisal. We string our tomatoes with sisal instead of plastic. It works great unless it's, the tomatoes we planted at the end of April and we're still harvesting in October. Some lower disease pressure years, we still are. That sisal rots and those tomatoes start falling over before we're finished harvesting. At that time, I'm questioning maybe we should use the white plastic or the orange plastic. We wrap all of our hay with just sisal twine, but the square bales we put in the barn loft, we don't feed those out. Sometimes they're in that loft for 5, 6, 8 years. We use the orange sisal or the plastic twine on those hay bales just because to keep mice from eating all the strings. So it's kind of it's an easy way out for me. Potential alternatives. So black plastic mulch, big crutch, what we're, a guilty pleasure, also is necessary for all the reasons David mentioned. They're all alternatives. We're experimenting and have been doing several years of no-till organic, which is growing mulches in place, roller crimping it and planting it, pumpkins and winter squash and soybeans or dry beans, stuff like that into it. It's working well. So there is theoretically the paper mulches. There's possible alternatives. So it's kind of like we're getting the benefits of the mulch. I'm using it right now, but theoretically we're actively trying to learn to use less and less and replace it with possible alternatives. Back to polywire. So here's poly netting with the pigs. It allows all the rotations, but some of the poly netting could theoretically be replaced with aluminum wire or metal wire. It's way less visible. It's way heavier for me to roll and unroll. There's a lot of downsides. It's going to make moving the stuff every day a lot more difficult, but theoretically, I could probably replace some of the poly wire with recyclable aluminum or metal wire. Okay, vital but difficult to replace. So in this picture, in the very center is a portable plastic sprinkler system. And then on each side, we have the netting, the insect netting. So maybe the netting can be replaced with a really fine aluminum or metal netting. I mean, we have screens in our windows that's made out of metal, but it's also not as light. I don't know if it can be replaced or not, but I put it here, especially in organic production. We're using more and more exclusionary practices that are involving plastic right now. So if we're going to have arugula in July, we're going to have something to keep the flea beetles off. If we're going to have lettuce in July, we have to have some shade and we have to have this sprinkler system here. Otherwise, you guys aren't going to be able to buy, salad mix from us in July or August because we need the cooling effect. And it takes portable, lightweight sprinklers to be moved often from bed to bed or to hang from the ceiling in a greenhouse. We also own, metal, aluminum, old-time sprinklers, but those things we use in emergency situations, like in a major drought, irrigating a crop once, not daily, multiple irrigations that we use the plastic sprinklers for so we can have lettuce in July. Drip tape, that's the last thing I wanted to mention. It's not in this picture, but drip tape single-handedly has probably saved another more just equally difficult conversation, which is water usage and the future of water. It's a huge conversations in different parts of the country. Drip tape alone has reduced water usage by, you can water the same crop with maybe a quarter of the water as when you do overhead irrigation. And then not only does it save water, using drip tape versus overhead sprinklers or guns or travelers, the energy it takes to irrigate that same 5 acres or 10 acres or 20 acres is significantly used by using drip tape. So it's like a double. Drip tape is one of those things that I think it needs to be figured out, a better made product, even if it requires plastic. The environment or the water usage can't do away with drip tape. All right, challenges. I'll touch on this quickly, but basically we've already talked about been mentioned the returnable packaging and stuff. When we first started our CSA a bazillion years ago, we handed them all out in peach baskets, and it was beautiful. I mean, customers loved it. It's adorable, great appeal. But you start getting your peach baskets back with dog hair in it or cat hair in it, and then it's going to somebody else's house the next week. I mean, nobody wants that. So in theory, it's awesome, and it's very attractive, and it's a marketing part, stick. But it's not really safe. And then you start getting food safety inspections and certifications and GAP certifications. You can't. So we do a lot of stuff in our CSA bags and paper bags, but some things, because they're wet and with moisture, we haven't found paper that can hold a salad mix without rotting by the time it gets to people's refrigerator. So we're still using plastic and some of that stuff. So some of those, we have to use some of these products because of food safety handling. We are selling retail stuff to people, and then some of it is out of convenience. But it's a big quandary for us. I talked about the mulch already. So I was saying black plastic mulch, we're replacing it in a window, basically in stuff we plant in June, with roller crimping rye that we've grown in place. But still, you can't get the advantage of, that doesn't work for the heating of the ground in late April. We still need a black plastic film to heat the ground, and we don't have any annual crop ready at that point. So we're working on it, and some of the paper mulches offer an alternative, but we're still, they help in an area, but it's still, there's a long ways to go. Polynetting, I've talked about that as well. Okay, that's all for me.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Ben Abell. I farm in Oldham County with my wife Bree and our 20 full-time and seasonal part-time employees. The name of my farm is Rootbound Farm. We are a certified organic farm raising vegetables and certified organic lamb, eggs, and chicken. We're somewhat similar to Elmwood, John's farm. So much so to the extent I'll let him use my slides for his pictures. He felt bad not having any. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our farm, why we are farmers, how we farm, and the role that plastics play there. So we are certified organic, as I mentioned, in everything we do, not just our veggies, but our animal products also. We are primarily a CSA farm. We send out about 1,000 CSA boxes a week in the growing season, Louisville, Lexington, and Frankfort. We farm on about 300 acres, a little over 40 acres of crop ground, and 250 acres of pasture. Where we raise our chickens, sheep, and cut hay. We've been on the farm we're at now for 10 years. We lease our land. We don't own any land. We became farmers because we were environmentalists first, and we thought that farming would provide an avenue to make an impact on the world that we live in. We had been involved in agriculture when we were younger, and could see kind of the way that farming could have a negative impact, and we thought that farming could be a way to have a positive impact on the environment. So as organic farmers, we certainly view our actions through the lens, and our decision making is done through the lens of we are making a positive impact on people's health and the environment. And so when we negotiate questions like our plastic usage, I think it's super important to constantly reevaluate that and to be challenged, which this panel is doing today. So we farm in a way that I kind of call traditional organic in the sense that we use tillage agriculture. We do use plasticulture on the farm. We use a mixture of overhead and drip irrigation. We plant things in beds and in rows. So we're kind of we use there's weird things happening below me. We use animals to play a critical role in our fertility cycle. We pay a lot of attention to soil health. And there's a lot of things that we do as organic farmers to positively influence our soil health as the foundation of our farm. But the way in which we farm is pretty recognizable. It's not super novel. When I was thinking of plastics and what do they offer, like I was going to walk through some specifics of how we use plastics on the farm, but what do plastics offer, I guess, first of all? They offer us convenience. What is convenience? Convenience is not just like it makes it handy, but it's something that plays a fundamental role in sort of like our sanity, and the sanity of our workforce, and sometimes the safety of our workforce. So an example of that would be, plastic mulch has been talked a lot because that is probably the number one way we use plastic on our farm. Without the use of plastic mulch, we are crawling on our hands and knees a lot more often, pulling weeds by hand for hours and hours a day. And plastic, while we also use a lot of crops on bare ground, and we have cultivation techniques to minimize hand weeding, there are certain crops that's pretty difficult to do without plastic. So it's convenient from a standpoint of adding sanity to our life as farmers. It adds a lot of efficiency, and ultimately we're in a very thin, we're running a business with very small margins, and so efficiency is critical. And the use of plastics, plastic films, and other plastics that we use on the farm add a lot of efficiency. Think whether that's plastic films, harvest totes, etc. They add productivity, which ultimately means we're having higher yields on the acreage we're using, and we're able to, on a farm landscape like ours, we're able to reduce our overall cropped acreage. And in Kentucky, we don't have any flat ground. We have what I call Kentucky flat, so it's acceptable. We can till it, and we're able to kind of take any marginal land we may have needed to produce crops. We're able to reduce the marginal lands that we're cropping and try to only crop our best land. That productivity is added by the use of plastic films, by row covers, and by growing select crops in high tunnels that otherwise do quite poorly as field crops. And then maybe plastic, so convenience, efficiency, productivity, and perhaps a little bit of sustainability also. It's a big question, but certainly plastic helps us use less water, reduce tillage because we have less cultivation passes through the field. We're having higher yields on the acreage we're using, and then we're also growing stuff in seasons that we otherwise could not. And so we're reducing, hopefully, our carbon footprint and our reliance on importing foods from the West Coast, Florida, or other countries by growing stuff later into the winter, earlier in the spring. So I don't like plastic at all, and I think Alejandra did a great job of illustrating the kind of the full life cycle negative impacts of plastic. And in my personal life, when I go shopping at the grocery, I buy things in glass containers. I try to avoid any single-use plastic. We use reusable water bottles. I have wool socks on, cotton undies, cotton pants, cotton t-shirt, and I hate polyester. But in the operation of our business, we do find ourselves perhaps having some contradictions in our values, and I think that's important to recognize. And I like the feeling of guilt. Was said earlier that was not meant to make us feel guilty using all this plastic. Well, I do feel guilty, and I think that's okay to feel guilty, and I think we maybe should feel guilty because hopefully that'll be an impetus to work towards change, because we are recognizing that we are telling a story of being a farm that is sort of central to improving the health of our community, the health of our bodies, the health of our workers, but still recognizing that we're using something so fundamental to our operation is quite harmful. Is this a timer that says 58 seconds or 57 Okay. Okay. So should I stop or should I go on a little bit longer? Is okay, that's not a timer? Okay. All right. So I wanted just to walk through, and I think John, we have similar production systems, so again, John kind of worked through some of his setups, but I just wanted to walk through kind of a year in the life of a crop on our farm to kind of illustrate how central plastic has frankly become. So it starts off, of course, when we order our seed, and of course, we're also ordering it on a plastic computer and using a plastic credit card, but I'll just mean in the actual life of a plant on our farm. It starts with the seed, and the seed arrives often in plastic packages, although not always, but often in plastic packages. We are going to take that seed and we're going to plant it in the greenhouse. And we get our potting media out of a bag, whether or not we use small bags or a large macro tote of potting media. It's a plastic tote, either way. It's planted in a propagation tray that is made out of plastic. It's watered with a watering wand whose head is plastic, and the water comes through a hose that is plastic. It's in a greenhouse that is covered with plastic. When it's time to plant that plant, we carry it out of the greenhouse, we throw it onto a transplanter where it passes through a little plastic cup into the ground on a transplanter with packing skis that are covered with plastic. If we're seeding that crop, the seed hoppers, of course, are plastic. The vacuum hoses are plastic on the seeder. The seed bowls are plastic, and the packing wheels are plastic. Before we've even planted that, to back up a step, we've plowed our fields, shaped up beds. Our bed shaper has a UHMW pan on it, which is plastic. After planting it, the first thing we do for most of our crops is cover them with row cover. Row cover protects our crops from insects. It's more or less essential to cover a large number of the crops we grow in Kentucky with row cover. At least I have found it essential on our farm. Those are, of course, woven polypropylene, woven plastics. Some of our crops we plant on bare ground, and some we plant on plasticulture. Comes time to harvest, we, of course, are harvesting all of our crops into a plastic bin. The plastic bins are sometimes dumped into, what does that mean exactly? Oh, 10 minutes, okay. I thought it meant 10 seconds. The plastic bins are sometimes dumped into other plastic bins called macro totes. They're stored in our walk-in cooler, which is insulated with plastic. When it comes to marketing our product, we're pulling stuff out of the cooler. We're itemizing it because we operate a CSA, and we're sometimes packaging things in plastic, especially leafy greens. It's very hard to get leafy greens, lettuce mixes, out to people without packaging them in plastic to maintain quality. Sometimes, like carrots or other root crops, especially to get them to maintain quality, we're also packaging those in plastic. These are all areas of the farm where we've worked to reduce plastic. So we used to do 25 acres of plastic. Now we have about 12. In our packaging, which is now where we're itemizing things, we've worked super hard to use pulp containers, brown paper bags, et cetera, but we still use plastic. Even our boxes that we send our CSA out in used to be wax boxes, which wax boxes are covered with often a petroleum-based wax. I guess not exactly a plastic, but kind of. I think it is. So we're using regular cardboard boxes now. So every component of our farm, we do try to look through that lens and try to reduce plastic where we can, but it's hard. So whose responsibility is it to reduce plastic, and how do we get to a future where we have less of it? Well, I think it's on us as small business people and farmers to be innovative and to push ourselves to reduce plastic wherever we can. I think when we have consumer pressure, it also helps. It helps us be innovative, but it also creates an industry of innovation that'll help move us away from plastic. And I think regulation also helps because it forces our hand, and it forces the hand of industry to become more innovative. But ultimately, I do think we need more help than just us farmers being more innovative, because it is difficult to imagine running similar farms to the way we have and making them, you know, the type of farms we can make a living without the use of plastic right now. But hopefully that can be in our future. So I'll wrap up so we can do some questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the speakers to come to the front here for a few minutes. And while you're making your way up there, I wanted to just have a couple closing thoughts on these presentations. Something that I really appreciated in these last two presentations was just thinking about how plastic has become so useful in just allowing farming to be successful, and particularly for smaller farms and more diversified farms, right? Like with larger scales and monocultures, there are more efficiencies that come, right? And without that, you're finding these other ways of creating efficiencies to reduce the labor needs, et cetera. So I think that's really important when we're considering who is the responsible party and who needs to make the change and who can make the change and what should that change look like, right? We don't have a lot of time for the panel discussions, but I actually thought what I might do is incorporate one of the Slido questions into kind of a final thought for the panel, and I don't know how we incorporate Alejandra in this, but this is a relevant question. Oh, I see you here in front of me. Ah, there she is, very large. So one of the questions, I think we can use this to shape our discussion here from the audience, is action at an individual and household level is great, but doesn't the solution need to be top-down and heavily subsidized if scaled change is going to happen? And one of the things that we were hoping to talk about in this session, but just didn't feel like we had a lot of time, was the role of policy. So just thinking about how policy fits into this, into the solution, and that's where I'd like Alejandra to make a comment at a high level, but then also thinking about, from the farmer perspective and the science perspective, what are the kinds of policies that we need in order to make these changes and to make effective reductions in plastic. So first I'll ask Alejandra to comment just on the role of policy in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, local policy, federal policy, and global policy is happening. We do need to make sure that that policy benefits farmers. And the only way that can happen is if we have this conversation with local officials or submitting our comments when the government reaches out to organic farmers. What can we do for you? We have to think about this right now so we can have solutions. We can talk about incentives. We can talk about a tax deduction, but we have to have the solutions prepared so we can offer government what is going to work for us before it is imposed into farmers. So I also believe that for policy to really make an impact, it has to come also from the community. So those conversations that we have in our communities, talking to people, why do we do organic farming? Why eliminating pesticides is important? Why eliminating plastics is important? And the connection between these systems, that's where systemic change happens. And that's where farmers can have the impact that we need to create policy and to develop policy at a federal and a global level.
Yeah, thank you, Alejandra. I think just emphasizing that role that, yes, we do need this, we need policies and regulations to help, force the hands of some people, whether it's the farmers or it's the petrochemical companies. But it's also at the individual level that we do have power to make that change, and we are the ones that have to ask for that change before that change is going to happen, right? And it can start as small as the local level, where we have a little bit more power and flexibility in what we do in our communities. So with that in mind, I'm just wondering if any of you at the front have ideas of the types of policies or subsidies or what kinds of things, resources would be needed for you to make some of these changes.
Right, go ahead. Oh, sorry. So I'm not sure that I'm prepared to have a policy recommendation. But I think that for me, kind of the way I think about it, you know, Ben listed off the tons of places we use plastic. And to me, it's, some of those are, it's just because they're available, they're easy. Like you buy a planter and it's got the plastic grain bins or the plastic water tank. So part of it is just, before plastic, that stuff was metal or aluminum or whatever. So part of it is just, that's just the way it is. That's the way it's sold, that's available. It could be easily replaced, and that's not probably on our shoulders. I was thinking more about what the impacts, the positive impacts that plastic has brought, how it's revolutionized parts of farming, and then versus the ones that should or could easily be replaced, but it's not because it's not available. And so whatever the policy is that would, low-hanging fruit, replace the stuff that's easily replaceable is the first thing to do. And that's just more either pricing or, you know, the plastic tanks are cheaper than the metal tanks or the grain hoppers or whatever. So I don't know if that's a policy thing or what, but that seems to be the first place to start. And then the harder questions are the things that have revolutionized ag that involve a lot of plastics. And, you know, to me, one of them would be, again, I hate the idea of regulating or policy to be the answer. But I mean, if high tunnels were banned, we'd all have the same expense of a glass greenhouse. But I can't afford to do a glass greenhouse and be competitive. And so, I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous answer on one hand, is ban high tunnels and plastic greenhouses, but that's kind of, we'd all be on the same level playing field if it was. And so that's the way I look at it, I guess.
Thanks. Ben, did you want to add to that?
I think the greenhouse one is a good example. I know that I had read that in the Netherlands, mostly when they build new greenhouses, they're almost always glass because in the 30-year life cycle, the glass houses are cheaper, and so it's hard for us to make a 30-year. You know, if it becomes cheaper at year 25, I guess is the point. So that's great because it's going to last 75 years. So how are we able to make investments like that when our bank, the bank will maybe give me a 5-year term on an equipment loan and usually a 3-year term. So how am I able to make a 30-year investment that does not pay for itself because it's going to pay for itself by being profitable, but I mean pay for itself compared to the plastic house is going to take 25 years. So it's things like that. I think, you know, it's which that can be addressed maybe through USDA loans, something like that, where we're able to access credit in a way that it helps us make investments that have a different life cycle. Yeah.
I'll just say that I think that some of the policies that are coming out, one of the key, you can't hear anything? One of the policies that are coming out that, thinking about wait, there it is. One of the policies that are coming out, thinking about, you know, where plastics are most harmful and targeting it, like plastic mulch is the first one they're talking about. They're thinking about the harm it can do, but I also think policy needs to really also address, you know, the cost to farmers and trying to incorporate those things. And are there ways of incentivizing these things, or at least holding off in, you know, sweeping changes that will put a lot of smaller farmers at a huge disadvantage. And so I think that's one of the keys going forward.
So I know, whoa, I had the opposite problem. I know we're at time. I just want to add one more point to this, though. I don't see Randy from NRCS, but I just have this thought, you know, the conservation programs, and those are supported by EQIP funding, which comes from the Farm Bill, which we vote on. So just thinking about where there are opportunities in these other types of programming to pay farmers, right, to be competitive and to use these non-plastic tools. So anyways, I want to thank you so much for your attention and thank the speakers again for everything they've shared. Thank you.